I went to the regular like Novus Ordo down the road church. But then somebody handed me some information about the Latin Mass. So I started reading a lot of traditional Catholic stuff.
Okay. So then from there, you go from Catholic to Eastern Orthodox? Is that when it changed?
Yeah, well, so in 2007, I thought there was definitely a God. I never doubted God's existence, but I was like, well, maybe it's Unitarian, maybe it's...
Ruslan.
So you go from Baptist, Presbyterian, kind of more Calvinist leaning, getting more into church history, and then where do you land after that?
So I had a professor at Monson Seminary who was a church history professor, and he's assigned this massive amount of church fathers and church history. So I read all of that, and then I was just in this quandary, and I was like, well, what about the canon of Scripture? What about the sacraments? This kind of stuff. So I decided I was going to have to read Augustine himself because I'd not yet read him. I'd only read...
Because the Calvinists love Augustine.
I know, right? Yeah. So I was like, I got to go see what he actually says.
Right.
So I read all of City of God at Bible College. And then I read against the Donatists and against the Pelagians, his anti-Pelagian writings. So I was becoming more and more convinced of like a high view of the sacraments, that kind of stuff.
You felt like in the circles you were in, there wasn't a high view of like communion and baptism?
No, because I was in a hardcore like Westminster Confession.
Interesting.
Calvinist church, right?
Okay.
So they had a pretty... I mean, amongst Calvinists it can differ, but my pastor happened to be pretty low church.
Okay. So you read Augustine, which is interesting because Augustine, from my understanding, he was like a North African dude, right? So for folks who are like, Christianity's a white man religion, it's like, well, everyone kind of loves Augustine, Protestants, Catholics.
Yeah, and he's Numidian.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if he was half black, half white or what, but I mean, yeah, he was definitely ethnic
to say the least.
Yeah. But I loved his theology. And so, and I went beyond that. I read like On Christian Doctrine. I read a lot of the sermons. I bought the Church Father set, basically, is what happened. That big 38 volume Philip Schaff set.
You read all of that?
No, I just started plumbing through Augustine.
Okay. Right? Just Augustine, and then you went to the rest. Got it.
Well, no, I didn't even read any Eastern Fathers. I was just like, I don't know about that.
Okay.
So I read Jerome, and then I read Ambrose. So I went heavy into that because I was trying to figure it out, like with this professor who I had. And we ended up having this big confrontation because he was like, you can't believe this and that. I'm like, well, but you're assigning me to read all the guys that do believe that. Anyway, long story short, that led to me starting to read Aquinas and starting to read a bunch of Catholic stuff. So when I was 23, I became Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was Catholic throughout most of my 20s.
Okay. And you're like all in Catholic.
Yeah, I was like,
all in.
I went to inquire about monastic life.
Okay.
And then I realized all the dudes there, including the guy who's in charge of it, they're all Skittles, shall we say?
Okay.
I was like...
You could tell that just from...
Oh, it was obvious.
It was obvious.
But I had other people telling me in the traditional Catholic circles, like, if you go that route, they're all Skittles.
Interesting.
As well known, yeah.
Yeah. I've had Father Simon on, who's a Catholic priest, who's local, and I connected with another one. I didn't get that vibe.
Well, I'm talking about
monastic
the
stuff.
Dominicans specifically,
Got you.
Because I was really into Aquinas.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, he was a Dominican, so I'll just check this out.
Got it.
Went and met with the diocese spiritual advisor dude. I was like, no, I'm good.
You're good. Okay. And so Calvinist to Catholic, and you're all in. Were you starting to do Catholic apologetics or not really?
I did, yeah.
You did.
It was Catholic apologetics that got me interested because my hero was Bahnsen.
Okay.
And he debated a famous Catholic apologist who kind of was best friends with Scott Hahn. You probably heard of Scott Hahn.
A little bit.
And that was like, there was this wave of people that left Calvinism in the 90s for Catholicism. And that was like Matitix and Scott Hahn. And I liked all those guys, read all those guys. So I read Scott Hahn's book, and then I got into Jerry Matitix's stuff. And he beat Bahnsen in a debate. So for me, that was kind of like a crushing moment because...
Were these written debates or what kind of debates?
No, audio.
Audio,
yeah,
okay.
You can still find them.
You can still find them.
Yeah, Bahnsen versus Matitix. They debated canon of Scripture and they debated Mary. Like
okay.
The high view, low view of Mary. So
yeah, I should go back and check some of that out. That's
I could probably find those.
Yeah.
I think I know they're on Word MP3. I don't know if they're on YouTube or not. But anyway.
Got it.
So that was me when I was like 20, 21, 22. I was like just trying to weed out all this stuff and reading all these books. I had a job, by the way, that made it really easy for me to just sit and read all day.
Yeah.
So
what was your job?
A paint mixer.
A paint mixer?
Yeah.
Okay. You
managed a paint
literally
shop.
watching paint dry mixer?
Mixing. No. So like it's funny because my last name's Dyer, and so there had to be some kind of providential connection.
God has
like
a sense of humor. Yeah.
Dying the past. So for 10 years, I was a paint store manager, paint mixer. But like I'd say from like, because all the painters are drunks, right? So they come in at like first thing in the morning, hungover.
Yeah.
And then nobody comes in the paint store until like 4 in the afternoon. So you have like a whole day to just sit and read.
Very blue collar of you.
It was, yes. I'm gonna have to put on some jeans.
You got to put on
with
jeans.
that
Canadian tuxedo like Zach Sparazzo. Okay, now did you ever go down the route of the what is the Catholics that don't like the Second Vatican Council? Is that
I went progressively hardcore tradcast. So when I became Catholic in 2003, I went to the regular church.
It's like Mel Gibson vibes, right?
I eventually went there.
Yeah, okay.
But that took 10 years.
Okay.
So like, or 9 years. I went to the regular like Novus Ordo down the road church. But then somebody handed me some information about the Latin Mass. So I started reading a lot of traditional Catholic stuff. So within a few years, I was going to the Society of St. Pius X's Latin Mass for the next almost decade.
Now, the church you were going to, are they in communion with Rome, or are they considered schismatic?
The first church I went to was just normal
Catholic
church.
Yeah.
And then I got more and more trad and went to the Memphis SSPX chapel, which they're in this weird status where like they will say the name of the Pope in the Mass, in the liturgy, but Rome considers them in this like halfway, not full communion status. So they've been arguing with Rome for the last 20 years.
And the theory there is that they changed the order of communion around the Second Vatican Council. Am I tracking
it's a lot of things. It's like the SSPX would take issue with the Novus Ordo Mass itself. They would take issue with the ecumenism of Vatican II, the statements of Vatican II about Muslims and Christians worshiping, all that kind of stuff. So they would take issue with all that. So for the SSPX, like Vatican II is a tricky issue because the popes have obviously taught it and confirmed it. They don't like it. They want to reject it. So it's this really weird kind of halfway position.
Interesting. Okay. So then from there, you go from Catholic to Eastern Orthodox? Is that when it changed?
Yeah, well, so in 2007, I started doubting Catholicism, 2008, 9, right? And these things are not black and white. Like you have phases of where you like doubt something, and then so I started reading Eastern Church Fathers.
Okay.
And at the time, I was dating a girl who we were both going to be Orthodox and get married. So we went through the catechumenate, but I was still very Thomistic, very Augustinian. So I just wasn't ready to convert to Orthodoxy. So I just held off.
Okay.
And just.
But you were going to Eastern Orthodox Church.
Yeah, we did the whole year of like we did the whole catechumenate in 2008. And then when it came time to be chrismated and received in the Orthodox Church, I was like, I'm just not ready to do this.
Okay.
So I held off.
Okay.
So
did you go back to Catholic?
A little bit, Protestant? But then I just kind of like was just in limbo.
Okay.
So I didn't do anything.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to go back to the Novus Ordo. I didn't believe the Tradcat stuff anymore.
Okay.
But I wasn't convinced of Orthodoxy. So I was just in a kind of a limbo state.
In a limbo state. Was any moment in your journey, there's like some sort of crisis of faith in general? Like I'm not even sure about all of this.
Yeah, no, I had a period where like I was like not sure about. I was never atheist, but I was like maybe Christianity isn't true. So I read Perennialists, I read Neoplatonists. I was interested in all that stuff.
Is this around the same time you're working on your philosophy degree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is finishing up undergrad, and then about the time of starting grad school around 2011, 12, 13. Yeah.
Would you say you were like a theist at that point, a deist? What would you have?
No, I would say like maybe Platonism, Neoplatonism. Like I thought there was definitely a God. I never doubted God's existence, but I was like, well, maybe it's Unitarian, maybe it's not Trinity. Okay. Right. So then what got me back in that direction was I started reading St. Maximus the Confessor around 2013. And then I read, I was like, I'm going to go back and reread the Bible. So I went back through the entire scriptures. And I noticed a lot of stuff I'd never noticed. I mean, I was always really interested in biblical theology, but rereading it from the lens and the vantage point of the Eastern Church Fathers was something that I think was a momentous change in my views.
Okay.
So, because at that time I'd read not just Maximus, but I read a lot of the Cappadocians, like Basil and Gregory. And so, yeah, I was like, all right, I guess now all the Thomistic baggage that I kind of had like stuck in my head kind of washed away. And I went back to just divine revelation scriptures. And it was like seeing it through new eyes, I guess.
And so then you go back to your at that point you have to go start the catechumen process all over again, or
I did read. Yeah,
you have to
started
start
over,
the whole
yeah,
thing.
I did.
And what is that process like? Because like we're seeing apostate prophet. I guess he's in the process of catechumenism. Hopefully I said that right. What does that entail? And it's a year, which I think is good. I think like give people a year to sort this thing out.
Yeah.
What was that process like?
Pretty flexible depending upon who your priest is. Like they will kind of make that decision based on where they think you are. So they might do 6 months or they might do 3 years. So Orthodoxy is pretty selective. Like they're not, it's not like Baptist or anything else, or even Catholic, right? Catholic RCA is like a few months. So no, it's like I think mine was about 8 months, 6 to 8 months.
And are you not allowed to do communion during that part? They're not giving
you don't
communion,
commune, but you are expected to attend regularly. And I think it's just kind of like, is this person serious?
Yeah.
You know, so
I'm assuming there's some discipleship that's happening with the priest and like one-on-one time and reading and stuff like that. How intensive is that part, I guess?
I mean, it wasn't intensive for me because I was used to reading theology all the time.
Yeah.
I think if you are not used to theology, it might be a little intensive because you probably have to read a couple books max. You're going to be going through at least a year, usually a year of the church's liturgical cycle to get you used to the feasts. And in Orthodoxy, like the liturgy is kind of the Bible theology in action. So you're getting biblical theology through the services, and you go through most of the scriptures within a year. So,
in terms of the Sunday morning liturgy, you're covering a lot of scriptures.
And any of the other services like Vespers that you can, like they will encourage you to come to as many as you can.
How many would you say you were coming to as you're going through the process of becoming a catechumen?
For me, because we lived about an hour from church, it was just Sunday stuff.
Okay.
And then part of the time I was in Florida, so I was going to a different Orthodox church, but doing my catechesis still through my Tennessee priest.
Got it. Why wait until this entire thing premieres on YouTube? Why not sign up for a free 7-day trial of our Patreon community and see this entire interview, as well as all of our interviews, early before they hit the public. And you'll also get access to the extended version of our conversations that are sometimes a little too spicy for YouTube. All right, so head on over to Patreon. Link is in the description or pinned comment. Here's a little preview of what's available on Patreon. So is Orthobros considered a derogatory term? You and Sam have your situation. What was your impression of the debate you had with him as a debate partner on Valuetainment? And then when do you think that devolved to what ended up devolving to, which we'll get into?
We don't make judgments about individuals. And like, I don't know your destiny. I don't know the work of God's Spirit in your heart. I do believe that, like the thief on the cross, and I tried to bring some, philosophical internal critiques to the table. And I think it was a blowout because if you go and, it's had multiple millions of views across the platforms. If you go to the Fresh and Fit channel, you can see 40,000-ish comments, 98% Islam lost.
Some of the folks that I see that are coming towards Eastern Orthodoxy seem to have a crippling fear and anxiety around their own salvation.
The argument that you're making violates the very thing that you just said would relativize the positions.
The argument that I'm making right now.
Your argument is no different than anyone else's argument. You're you're saying, I have this position, they have that position, you have your position.
Yeah.
Of course, but that has nothing to do with
Ruslan